The 47 Ronin, Eternal Revenge, Blood Protocol, the Palace of Poisons. It was the 14th day of the third month of the 14th year of Genroku, what Westerners would call March 21st, 1701, when fate knocked on the doors of Edo Castle with bloodied fists. Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi had decided to receive the emperor's envoys from Kyoto, with all the pomp that the stability of his regime required, and the palace was abuzz with preparations for a ceremony that would demonstrate to the entire world the perfect harmony between secular power and sacred authority. In the castle's inner chambers, where polished wooden corridors echoed with the rustle of expensive silks and the discreet clink of ceremonial swords, men of noble blood walked on tatami mats worth more than entire villages. It was here, in this world of lethal etiquette, where a slight incline of the head could mean death, that Japan's great families danced their eternal dance of power, influence, and survival. Among these aristocrats sailed Asano Takumi-no-Kami Naganori, lord of the Ako domain, a 35-year-old man whose honesty was as rare at court as diamonds in mud. His clothing, a dark blue hakama over a pristine white kimono, spoke of wealth, but not ostentation. His erect posture and direct gaze contrasted with the bowed bow and downcast eyes that characterized most courtiers. Asano was not born for this world of whispered intrigues and venomous smiles. He was a domain lord who preferred inspecting rice paddies to negotiating political alliances, who treated his vassals fairly rather than exploiting them to ruin, who genuinely believed that virtue and honor were more valuable than gold and influence. In short, he was exactly the kind of man the Tokugawa court ate alive. Protocol required that domain lords inexperienced in the intricacies of palace etiquette be instructed by official masters of ceremonies. For Asano, this responsibility had fallen on the shoulders of Kira Yoshinaka, a man whose corruption was so profound that it had become almost artistic in its design, the master of corruption. Kira was a creature who could exist only in the rarefied environment of Japanese high politics, where proximity to absolute power had transformed ordinary human vices into sophisticated art forms. At 62, he had spent decades refining his ability to extract wealth from proud men through an alchemy that transformed formal necessity into pure gold. His method was simple in conception, diabolical in execution. As official master of ceremonies, he possessed exclusive knowledge of the complex rituals that governed interactions between the shogunate and the imperial court. Domain lords who needed to navigate these treacherous waters were forced to rely on his guidance. Guidance he provided only upon substantial payment of gifts that were anything but optional. Those who paid generously received meticulous instruction in every nuance of etiquette, every detail of protocol, every trap that could turn sacred ceremony into political humiliation. Those who resisted their extortionate methods discovered they had been inadvertently misinformed about crucial aspects of the ceremony, resulting in public insults to the shogun that could cost not only their social standing, but also their lives. The system was as ingenious as it was repugnant. Kira had transformed her own virtue into vulnerability, using the honor of others as leverage for her own greed. She was a predator who fed on integrity, a parasite that grew stronger with every act of decency she managed to pervert or punish. When Asano Naganori arrived in Edo to oversee the ceremonial preparations, Kira assessed the young daimyo with eyes that had learned to calculate the exact price of human dignity. He saw a man of moderate wealth, enough to be worth exploiting, but not enough to indefinitely withstand financial pressure. He saw someone whose personal code of honor would prevent him from engaging in the subtler forms of corruption that characterized courtly survival. In short, I saw a perfect victim. "Asano-sama," he said, his words dripping like poisoned honey when they first met in the preparatory halls. "What an honor to guide such a virtuous domain lord in the mysteries of imperial protocol. I hope our collaboration will be mutually fruitful." The choice of words was not accidental. Each syllable carried a second layer of meaning, a delicate suggestion that guidance and collaboration had specific prices that wise men paid without question. It was the coded language of refined extortion, so subtle that its victim might not fully comprehend the threat until it was too late to avoid its consequences. Asano, accustomed to the direct communication that characterized rural domain administration, completely missed the venomous subtleties of Kira's approach. He heard offers of assistance where he should have recognized demands for payment, interpreting formal courtesy as genuine cooperation. It was the kind of naivete that the Tokugawa court punished with brutal efficiency. The dance of needs. The following days were a masterful lesson in how systematic corruption could be disguised as professorial guidance. Kira led Asano through seemingly educational sessions on imperial protocol, each lesson revealing progressively more complex layers of etiquette governing interaction between secular and sacred representatives. The exact position of the knees during the initial bow, Kira explained, his voice taking on the pedantic tone of a scholar discussing ancient texts, should vary according to the lunar phase, the position of the imperial envoys in the hierarchy of the Kyoto court, and the specific number of days since the shogun's last ritual purification. An error of even half a degree could be interpreted as a deliberate insult to the emperor's divine authority. Each instruction was accompanied by increasingly less subtle hints about the costly nature of such specialized knowledge. Kira casually mentioned the generous tokens of appreciation other daimyos had offered for similar guidance, and described in unnecessary detail the inappropriate gifts that had resulted in public humiliation for less far-sighted lords. Asano, genuinely focused on mastering the intricacies of protocol to properly serve his shogun, initially interpreted these suggestions as casual conversation. His rural world had operated according to straightforward principles. Honest labor was rewarded with fair pay, knowledge was shared without ulterior motives, guidance was offered out of duty, not greed. The gradual realization that he was being extorted came slowly, like cold water penetrating heavy clothing. First came the more direct suggestions about appropriate gifts. Then came the explicit comparisons with other daimyos who had demonstrated wisdom through financial generosity. Finally, veiled threats about the consequences of protocol misunderstandings that could result from inappropriate guidance. "You understand, Asano-sama," Kira said one particularly tense afternoon, his eyes shining with the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered his prey. "That imperial protocol is like a double-edged sword. Wielded properly, it cuts through political difficulties and establishes a lasting reputation. Wielded incorrectly—" He paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air like toxic incense. It was at this moment that Asano finally understood the true nature of his situation. He wasn't receiving an education, he was being blackmailed. He wasn't a student, he was a victim, and the man who was supposed to guide him through the complexities of serving the shogun was in fact using that service as an opportunity to plunder his family wealth. The anger that surged in him was not the explosive fury of an uncontrolled temper, but something far more dangerous. The cold indignation of an honest man confronted with corruption so blatant that it challenged his fundamental understanding of how civilized human beings should behave. "What if I refuse to pay for your gifts?" he asked, his voice controlled but laden with a promise of violence that made Kira flinch instinctively. The old courtier's smile widened, revealing teeth like yellowed blades. "Then you will discover, Asano-sama, that there are many ways for a man to publicly humiliate himself without understanding exactly how it happened. The price of integrity." The week that followed was an elaborately orchestrated psychological torture. Kira, realizing she had encountered unexpected resistance from her latest victim, intensified her pressure campaign with the malicious creativity of someone who had turned the destruction of honorable men into an art form. During protocol training sessions, he began providing deliberately contradictory information, instructing Asano in procedures that either cancelled each other out or contained subtle traps designed to result in public failure. When the daimyo questioned these inconsistencies, Kira responded with venomous condescension, suggesting that provincial men naturally struggled to grasp subtleties that refined aristocrats absorbed instinctively. "Perhaps," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Asano-sama should consider asking a more experienced subordinate to take over his ceremonial responsibilities. Men of certain backgrounds sometimes find that the demands of court exceed their natural capabilities. The insults were calculated to provoke exactly the kind of response that would ultimately justify official punishment. Kira had perfected the art of pushing proud men beyond the limits of their self-control, creating situations where his victims destroyed themselves through their own reactions to his provocation. But Asano, though inexperienced in court politics, was not stupid. He recognized the nature of the trap being built around him and forced himself to maintain a composure that was becoming more difficult each day. He swallowed insults that would have resulted in deadly duels in any other context, accepted humiliations that wounded his soul, and endured provocations that tested the very limits of human endurance. The cost of this forced self-restraint was visible to anyone who knew where to look. His servants noticed he slept poorly, ate little, and spent hours contemplating his sword with an expression that mixed longing and despair. Letters to his wife became shorter, more formal, as if he were distancing himself from connections he didn't want to contaminate with the filth that surrounded him. During this time, other daimyos who had gone through the same experience watched from afar with a mixture of sympathy and relief. Sympathy because they recognized the suffering Asano was experiencing. Relief because they were not the ones being slowly destroyed by the master of corruption. "He should just pay," one old man muttered to another during a tea ceremony. "We all do. It's the price of doing business in this place." "But look how he holds up," his companion replied, with something that might have been admiration. "It's been years since I've seen someone try to maintain dignity against Kira for so long. It's almost inspiring." "It's suicidal," the first corrected, "and it will end as all these confrontations do, with Kira victorious and another good man destroyed." It was a prophecy that would be fulfilled sooner than anyone could have imagined, because Asano, in his desperate struggle to preserve his integrity against forces designed specifically to destroy it, had reached the absolute limit of what any human being could bear. And when honorable men are pushed beyond their limits, the consequences are rarely predictable or controllable. The blood protocol that would define the rest of his life was about to be written. The moment of breakdown. The morning of March 14, 1701, dawned with a quality of light that Japanese poets would call mono no aware, the melancholy sadness that accompanies the realization of the impermanence of all things. It was the day of the official ceremony, when imperial envoys would be received with all the pomp that protocol demanded, and Asano awoke knowing, with a bone-chilling certainty, that something terrible was about to happen. In the palace corridors, the tension was palpable. Hundreds of officials, servants, and dignitaries moved in choreographed patterns, each playing their part in a dance that had been rehearsed for weeks. The very air seemed to vibrate with the importance of the moment. This was the kind of event that would define relations between secular and sacred power for years to come. Asano arrived in the main hall wearing his finest ceremonial clothing, a purple silk hakama over a pristine white kimono, his family crests shining like stars against the rich fabric. Outwardly, he looked the very picture of aristocratic dignity. But those who knew him well could see signs of extreme tension, the way his hands twitched slightly, the way his eyes seemed constantly searching for signs of betrayal, the way every muscle in his body was taut like a bowstring about to snap. Kira, in contrast, radiated the calm confidence of a predator who had completely cornered his prey. His clothes were even more elaborate than Asano's. Every thread spoke of decades of amassing wealth through methods honorable men wouldn't dare consider. He moved through the final preparations with the authority of someone who controlled every aspect of what was about to unfold. It was during the final review of the protocol, moments before the imperial envoys arrived, that Kira decided to deliver the final blow. He approached Asano with a scroll in his hands, his expression a mask of false concern. "Asano-sama," he said, loud enough for other officers to hear, "I'm afraid there's a problem with your understanding of bowing protocol. It seems the instructions you received were inadequate." He unrolled the scroll, revealing a diagram showing bowing positions completely different from those he had taught during weeks of preparation. "As you can see," he continued, addressing the surrounding officials as if they were students in a lecture, The correct position requires representatives of lesser domains to demonstrate additional submission through full prostration. I fear that Asano-sama's limitations of origin may have resulted in inadequate instructions. The insult was threefold. First, it implied that Asano had received inadequate training through his own incompetence. Second, it publicly demeaned his domain as lesser. Third, it suggested that his limitations of origin, a veiled reference to ancestors who had been merchants before becoming samurai, disqualified him for aristocratic responsibilities. But the most devastating thing was the timing. With the imperial envoys arriving within minutes, there was no time to learn new procedures. Asano would be forced to choose between public humiliation by following the new instructions or public humiliation by ignoring them. It was a perfect trap, years of preparation converging into a moment of inevitable destruction. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to freeze. Everyone present instantly understood what had happened, recognizing the venomous mastery with which Kira had orchestrated the ruin of yet another victim. Some felt pity, others reluctant admiration for the technical expertise of the destruction. Many simply relief that they were not at the center of this deadly web. Asano remained motionless for perhaps 10 seconds, an eternity in a situation where every moment was timed with military precision. His eyes moved from the scroll to Kira's smiling face, then to the faces of the other officers, finally landing on the ceremonial sword he carried at his side. And in that moment, something fundamental broke within him. Not his courage, not his resolve, but his faith in the possibility that virtue could coexist with power, that honor could survive in environments designed to destroy it, that good men could find justice in a world ruled by predators like Kira. His hand found the hilt of his sword, the first cut. The sound of steel being unsheathed echoed through the ceremonial hall like thunder breaking through a serene sky. It was a sound that shouldn't have existed in this sacred space. Courtiers' swords were symbols, not weapons, decorative pieces that spoke of status without ever tasting blood. But the blade Asano raised against Kira gleamed with the promise of real violence, tempered steel that had proven its worth on real battlefields. For a split second, time seemed suspended. Kira, who had spent decades orchestrating the destruction of other men through subtle and indirect methods, suddenly found himself confronted with the possibility of immediate and visceral death. His face, so confident moments before, contorted into a mask of terror as the reality of his mortality imposed itself over years of apparent impunity. "Asano-sama, no," shouted one of the nearest officers, but his words were lost in the roar of blood that filled the enraged daimyo's ears. Years of humiliation, weeks of psychological torture, a lifetime of believing that virtue would be rewarded and injustice punished. All of it distilled into a single moment of pure fury that demanded satisfaction through steel. The first blow struck Kira in the forehead, opening a gash that sent blood streaming down the old courtier's face like red tears. It was a superficial wound. In the heat of the moment, with other officials trying to intervene, Asano couldn't apply the full force he had intended. But it was real blood, on the sacred ground of the shogun's palace, spilled by one vassal against another during preparations to receive divine representatives. It was, in every possible sense, an absolute catastrophe. Kira fell to her knees, her hands flying to the wound on her forehead, her screams of pain and terror echoing through the adjacent hallways like fire alarms. Blood dripped between her fingers, staining her expensive clothes, creating a puddle that spread across tatami mats, worth more than many families' annual income. "Murder!" he screamed, his voice hysterical with pain and instant opportunism. "Murder in the sacred palace. Asano Naganori tried to kill me. He tried to assassinate a shogun's official on sacred ground." The screams drew guards from every corner of the palace complex. Within seconds, Asano found himself surrounded by spears and swords, trained men sworn to protect the sanctity of the palace against precisely this kind of violation. It didn't matter if they sympathized with his plight. It didn't matter if they recognized the provocation that had led to this moment. Their obligations were clear and absolute. "Lower your weapon," ordered the guard captain, a veteran of many campaigns whose voice carried unquestionable authority. "Asano-sama, for the sake of your soul and your family's honor, lower your sword and submit to the shogun's justice." Asano looked around the circle of blades surrounding him, then at Kira, still bleeding on the ground, finally at his own sword, stained with the blood of the man who had made his life hell. The fury that had sustained him through the attack was dissipating, replaced by a terrible understanding of what he had done and the inevitable consequences that would follow. He had broken the most fundamental law of civilized existence. He had drawn his sword on sacred ground. He had attacked a superior officer during ceremonial preparations. He had transformed a moment of national harmony into a scene of chaotic violence. There was no forgiveness for such crimes. There was no explanation that could justify such actions. There was no future beyond death with honor through ritual seppuku. Slowly, with the dignity of a man who had finally understood the full price of his integrity, Asano lowered his sword and returned it to its sheath. "I submit," he said, his voice echoing with a strange serenity, "and I accept whatever punishment the shogun deems appropriate." The seeds of revenge. In the hours following the attack, Edo Castle became a hive of frenetic activity. Messengers scurried through the corridors, carrying news that would spread throughout Japan before sunset. The imperial ceremony was cancelled, a national humiliation that would echo through diplomatic relations for years to come. And in private rooms where real power resided, serious men discussed the implications of an event that had shattered decades of carefully constructed stability. In the hours following the attack, Edo Castle became a hive of frenetic activity. Messengers scurried through the corridors, carrying news that would spread throughout Japan before sunset. The imperial ceremony was cancelled, a national humiliation that would echo through diplomatic relations for years to come. And in private rooms where real power resided, serious men discussed the implications of an event that had shattered decades of carefully constructed stability. Asano was confined to private quarters to await the trial that everyone knew was merely a formality. The law was clear, absolute, with no possible exceptions. Violence in the shogun's palace was punishable only by death, no matter the circumstances, no matter the provocation, no matter that the victim was universally despised for his corruption. Sacred protocol had been violated, and such a violation demanded blood in retribution. But it was in the castle's back corridors, away from the eyes of higher officials, that very different conversations were taking place. Samurai from the Ako domain, who had accompanied their lord to Edo, whispered among themselves in voices filled with a fury that grew with each passing minute. Oishi Kuranosuke, Asano's chief advisor, was a 43-year-old man whose loyalty to his lord had become legendary even before this crisis. Tall and lean, with prematurely graying hair that spoke of decades of carrying responsibilities that would have broken lesser men, he possessed a mind that operated like a precision machine, capable of seeing connections others missed, of planning strategies that unfolded over years, of turning apparent defeat into victory through sheer patience and determination. "Our lord has been deceived," he murmured to a circle of loyal samurai, his voice low but filled with a promise that made everyone lean in to hear. "He has been provoked beyond the limits of human endurance by a man whose corruption shames his own ancestors. And now he will be forced to pay with his life for a moment of true honor in a world that has forgotten the meaning of the word." Horikawa Zusho, a young samurai whose devotion to Asano bordered on worship, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "Then what do we do? Let our bloodline die out? Let the Ako domain be confiscated? Let Kira live on while our lord dies?" The question hung in the air like toxic incense. Everyone knew the answer. When a daimyo died in disgrace, his domain was confiscated, his samurai became Ronin, and their families lost their position and protection. It was the collective price of serving a lord who had violated the fundamental laws of society. But Oishi had spent decades studying not just military tactics, but the labyrinthine complexities of law and custom that governed Japanese society. And in his research, he had uncovered something few knew: an obscure legal precedent that allowed vassals to avenge their lords in specific circumstances, provided such revenge was carried out according to precise protocols and culminated in the avenger's ritual seppuku. "There is a way," he said finally, his words carrying the weight of a decision that would change not only their own lives, but the course of Japanese history. "A way that allows us to serve our master even in death, to restore our family's honor, to demonstrate to the world that true loyalty transcends existence itself. He paused, looking into the eyes of each man present, measuring their resolve, assessing their courage, calculating their ability to endure what he was about to propose. When our Lord dies, and he will, for the law allows no other option, we will become Ronin. We will lose our position, our wealth, our future, but we will keep our swords. And with these swords we can write a final page in our family history that will be remembered as long as Japan exists. The eyes around the circle shone with dawning understanding. Vengeance, not just abstract justice, but direct, personal, bloody retribution against the man who had destroyed everything they loved. Kira Yoshinaka will die, Oishi continued, his voice taking on the ritualistic quality of a sacred oath. Not today, not tomorrow, but when we are ready, when we have planned perfectly, when we can ensure that his blood will wash away the stain on our Lord's honor. And then we will follow him in death, joining him in the world beyond with our duty completed. It was a proposal for collective suicide disguised as a sacred mission. It was a promise of years of life dedicated entirely to preparing for a single moment of violence that would result in inevitable death for all involved. And everyone present accepted immediately. "We swear," they said in unison, their voices creating a harmony that echoed through the halls like a promise from the gods themselves. "By our Lord, by our honor, by our family, we swear that Kira Yoshinaka will pay for his crimes in blood." Thus was born the conspiracy that would consume the next 2 years of their lives and create one of the most enduring legends in Japanese history. The blood protocol had been violated in the shogun's palace, but an even deeper protocol, that of absolute loyalty, was just beginning to be written.